Today, as I said, almost about 90% of farmers growing cotton use BT cotton in India. Despite its extensive use, several farm groups and activists continue to protest its use, arguing that the high usage of BT cotton points not to a conscious choice made by farmers in preference of the BT strain, rather it is an outcome of the non-availability of non-BT cotton varieties. Okay? So that non-BT cotton varieties are not available at all, particularly in the Vidarbha region. All of them are pretty much BT cotton varieties, but the proponents of GMOs often talk about the conscious choice by farmers of the use of BT cottons, okay? And the opponents of this actually point to the increased use of pesticide in BT cotton fields, declining pest resistance of cotton plants as demonstrated by the case of the 2000-2001 American bollworm infestation, and increased suicide rates in farmers in the districts growing BT cotton as evidence of the problems associated with the adoption of BT cotton. Interestingly, on March 5, 2010, Monsanto itself released a report acknowledging that the Cry1AC gene, which is used to create the BT cotton, has been unable to create bollworm resistance, particularly pink bollworm resistance in Bolgard cotton in 4 districts in Maharashtra. So they have themselves acknowledged. And yet the BT proponents continue to argue that in fact this will create pesticide resistance and provides pesticide resistance and better crop production. So clearly it's about interests. The second, BT brinjal, as I said, what is important, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in just a little bit, that there were public-private partnerships that were used to try and move this BT GMO crop to food crops. And why did they use BT brinjal? You know, there is no shortage of BT brinjal in India. India has over 300 varieties of BT brinjal, of brinjal, not BT brinjal. So there's no shortage. So there was no need for actually trying to introduce BT crops into aubergine or into brinjal. The reason some scholars have suggested that they used BT brinjal was because they felt it was a small crop that they would sort of pass by without much detection by the opponents of the GM crops, and thus they would have an entryway into, because if one food crop was approved, then it would be an entryway into other food crops. There are trials going on right now, even though there's a moratorium on BT cotton, there are trials going on in rice and lentils and many other vegetable crops as well. So, I mean, this is not over yet. It's sort of the beginning phase, and the congratulations that that we must give civil society groups that were so instrumental in placing this moratorium should not make these groups more, what should I say, laid back to this, and they need to sort of, and they all talk about how they need to continue to be much more conscious of this fact that this battle has just begun. Just a couple of things, and I know I want to make sure I don't run out of time, of WikiLeaks and GMOs. And this is not where I'm heading, but this was clearly of some interest to me as I read this. We know that WikiLeaks reports have actually given us some reporting on GMOs. And so I put something on the State and Corporate Alliance. In 2007, US Ambassador to France, Craig Stapleton, writes, and there's this quote from him that WikiLeaks has put out, right? Europe is moving backwards, not forwards on this issue, with France playing a leading role along with it, Austria, Italy, etc. Moving to retaliation will make clear that the current path has real cost to EU interests. So here's sort of, some people have been suggesting that this WikiLeaks release on GMOs suggests this sort of corporate state alliance, and but obviously that's not my sabbatical work, but I thought it might be of some interest to you as we proceed. So who are the stakeholders on? Who are the stakeholders in terms of the debate on BT crops in India? I've tried to do it in terms of state, society, a 2x2 proponents and opponents. And if you see under the state, and clearly this is not an exhaustive list because, first of all, just as someone who, most of my students make fun of me as not being very technologically savvy here, so just sort of battling with this framework was a little bit difficult, and so I decided that I would keep it small, but I can obviously talk a little bit more. So I talk about in the state, the proponents are the Ministry of Science and Technology, the RCGM, which is the Department of Biotechnology, GEAC, which is the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, the Ministry of Agriculture. If you see the Ministry of Environment and Forests, I've sort of put it across, cutting both proponents and opponents, and you will see, I'll talk a little bit about it in just a little bit. I don't see it as, because it was the Ministry of Environment and Forests and Jairam Ramesh, who's the minister, who actually placed the moratorium. And that might lead us to believe that he is an opponent of GMOs. But he really is not an opponent of GMOs, even though he has talked about using the precautionary principle to move forward on GMOs. And so he's sort of crossing these two, he's straddling these two boundaries. So in terms of society, something I call the academic industrial complex, and my next slide actually will sort of talk a little bit about that. Who are proponents of it. I've just listed two, Cornell University and Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, only because actually there is this alliance between, and Cornell University has actually been quite central in actually funding some of these universities that I'll talk about. I talk about other epistemic brokers that are both local and global, including a community of scholars, although the community of scholars could also go into the academic industrial complex. Corporate brokers, here I've just put Monsanto and Mako. There are also, interestingly, farmers who actually do support this. And these are, there's a sort of class differentiation. Some of the bigger farmers support it. But it's not that clear cut, so I've just left it as farmers. I did not write rich farmers. If you look at opponents, epistemic brokers, again, global and local, NGOs, civil society, activists. There are three that I'm specifically focusing on in my talk on the judiciary. That is Gene Campaign, and it is led by, interestingly, many women in the leadership of these campaigns. Gene Campaign, which is led by Dr. Suman Sahai. RFSTE, which is Research Foundation on Science, Technology, and Ecology, which is Vandana Shiva's organization, also known as Navdanya. Then there are other three who are not necessarily, and actually I've got Greenpeace India, I'm missing a name on the other two, I realize, Aruna Rodriguez, Devinder Sharma, and there's a third person, PV Satish, as you will see, who have been very strong in sort of the writ petition to the Supreme Court. Anyway, and academic industrial complex that I kind of want to talk about, the Cornell University's Agricultural Support Project actually funds the Tamil Nadu Agricultural University in Coimbatore, the University of Agricultural Science in Dharwad in Andhra Pradesh. This is where much of the research on BT crops is going on. The Indian Institute of Vegetable Research in Varanasi in UP. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to sort of touch on was this, these inter-academy kind of reports, and I just need to pull out something that I had made a note on. Here we go. The last one, where I talk about inter-academy reports on GM crops, Jairam Ramesh, who was the minister, which I showed you from the Ministry of Environment and Forests, he asked this group to give him an inter-academy report on GM crops after he placed the moratorium on BT crops. These were the academies. The GM Watch, so the Indian Academy of Science, Indian National Academy of Engineering, blah, 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 okay? The GM Watch actually reports on this and calls it sham science. The reason they call it sham science is that the Academy actually produced this huge report, but they only held one meeting in June, and it was a brainstorming meeting. It was attended by very few of these Academy experts, and their report that they have actually plagiarized sections of the report from another report, written by the GEAC, which had actually replicated the ISAA, and remember I talked about the ISAA, which is the sort of mouthpiece of the GM industry, that they had actually picked sections of the ISA's report and plugged it into the GEAC report, and then this group has taken that and plugged it into their report. So you can clearly see the links between the GM mouthpiece, the GEAC, and this inter-academy report. And so thus I call it the academic industrial complex, which is sort of feeding into these other arguments. Okay. A couple of other things that I want to just talk about. In the Ministry of Environment and Forests, why did I place it across proponent and opponent line? Because in some ways, this is the guy with the eggplants garland around him, right there. Let's see if I can show you right there, right, this picture, this one. This guy is Jairam Ramesh, okay? He's the minister. And this was at one of the meetings. He decided to do something, and it's quite foundational in terms of Indian policy making. It has never been done before. He held 6 public meetings all across India. These were 4-hour meetings. I attended 3 of them. And these were meetings that were held in Bhubaneswar, which is in Orissa. And Bhubaneswar, because it grows about 30% of eggplant or brinjal, okay? In Calcutta, West Bengal, which grows about 20% of all eggplant production in India, okay? In Ahmedabad, in Gujarat, because BT cotton, it's the home of BT cotton, right? I mean, the Gujarat area and Maharashtra area is where a lot of the BT cotton is grown. Nagpur in Maharashtra, again, where the home of BT cotton. Chandigarh, which is the capital of both Punjab and Haryana, the states of Punjab and Haryana. This is where clearly it's a very strong agricultural area and therefore wanted input from there. Hyderabad, Andhra Pradesh, this is where a lot of the biotech research is going on in the south, okay? But there's also alternative agricultural bodies. So the Center for Sustainable Agriculture is there, the Deccan Development Society, that are actually doing a lot of very interesting work in alternatives, organic farming, etc. And Bangalore in Karnataka, which is also in the south, and it is also the headquarters of much of the biotech industry. Actually, much of the software industry is also there. So you may have heard of Bangalore. You can see I've got some pictures of people protesting. There were massive protests, if you're interested. I have a lot of this, but I needed to sort of not just, I needed to kind of move beyond to what I wanted. So I'm not even where I want to be right now, but let's see. Okay, so here we go. Judicial activism and public interest litigation. Public interest litigation in India, let me just sort of pull out, I'm kind of way behind here, I have not opened this, so, okay.
It's here at about 12:30.
Okay, all right. Public interest litigation in India is, the Supreme Court has always had sort of this very judicial activist role. In its early history, the Supreme Court of India was actually pretty conservative. It protected landed interests, etc. But right after the emergency in India, which was imposed by Indira Gandhi in the late 70s, the Supreme Court actually tried to redeem itself by taking a very different position. And since post-emergency, the Supreme Court has been quite different in terms of its role. It has taken on, and it was because of 2 Chief Justices that it took on this very, very kind of strong role of providing kind of justice to the disempowered. The political ideology of 2 justices, P. N. Bhagwati and V. R. Krishna Iyer, actually the first 2 justices to institutionalize public interest litigation is very, very important. I'll just read you one. P. N. Bhagwati's argument in Bihar Legal Support Society versus Chief Justice of India case. Here's from the ruling. The weaker sections of Indian humanity have been deprived of justice for long years. They have no access to justice on account of their poverty, ignorance, and illiteracy. They're not aware of the rights and benefits, kind of paternalistic, but they're not aware of the rights and benefits conferred upon them by the Constitution and law. On account of their social and economically disadvantaged position, they lack the capacity to assert their rights. They do not have the material resources, etc.